Welcome back again to Real Talk, the podcast where we dive into films that have left a mark on the cinematic landscape, peeling back the layers of story and style and even a few oddities along the way. I'm Josh Bell, your host, and today we're about to step into a world of black and white charm, quirky science experiments, and the all too relatable bond between a boy and his dog. You guessed it, we're talking about Tim Burton's Frankenweenie. Now, if you're following along, you know we're making our way through every feature film Burton has directed. Each one is a chapter in the story of an artist whose style is as unmistakable as it is eccentric, and today's entry is no exception. Frankenweenie has a unique place in Burton's career. It may have started as a live-action short film in 1984, but in 2012, he revisited this tale through the art of stop-motion animation. This isn't just a remake, it's a chance for Burton to expand on one of his earliest ideas, giving it the full treatment with his now signature style. But what makes Frankenweenie so interesting is that it manages to combine all those Burton elements we've come to expect. Think darkly whimsical settings, misfit characters, and a hefty dose of gothic flair, with an unexpectedly heartfelt story. And here's the thing, Frankenweenie doesn't feel like just any Tim Burton movie. This film is as quirky, gothic homage to the monster movies Burton loved as a kid, but it's also deeply personal, maybe even nostalgic. It's the type of movie that says it's okay to be strange, to feel out of place, and to find comfort in the unusual. Yet, as much as it has its charms, it's not without its flaws. I'll share my final thoughts and a score at the end of the episode, but first, let's dive into the heart of Frankenweenie, its story, style, and why this little stop-motion experiment deserves its place in Burton's unique filmography. Alright, so let's get into the heart of Frankenweenie's story. So our main character here is Victor Frankenstein. Yes, an obvious nod to the classic horror legend, but here he's a young, science-loving boy in a small, quiet town called New Holland. Victor is the quintessential Burton protagonist. He's a little bit odd, curious and misunderstood, with a mind that gravitates toward the unusual. His best friend and true companion in this world? His dog Sparky. They're inseparable, and Sparky becomes more than just a pet to Victor. He is his creative muse, his partner in exploration, and in many ways his emotional anchor. Then comes the tragedy. Sparky is killed in an accident, and Victor is left completely devastated. But rather than accept this loss, Victor's grief leads him down a path only Burton could envision. He decides to bring Sparky back to life through a high-voltage experiment inspired by his favorite science teacher. In true Frankenstein fashion, Victor reanimates Sparky, breathing life back into his furry friend with a flash of lightning and some DIY laboratory work that would make Dr. Frankenstein proud. Of course, keeping a resurrected dog under wraps isn't easy, especially in a town as small and nosy as New Holland. Soon, Victor's classmates catch on and things spiral fast. Each kid with their own unique quirks and agendas tries to recreate Victor's experiment. The result? A series of reanimated pets with their own strange personalities, leading to chaos as monstrous cats, resurrected rodents, and other oddities run wild through the town. It's a madcap escalation with Burton trademark mix of surreal and darkly comedic settings, setting the stage for both heart-pounding and laugh-out-loud moments. At its core, Frankenweenie is a classic story of friendship and loss, but it's also a cautionary tale about the consequences of pushing nature beyond its limits. It asks, how far would you go to hold on to the ones you love? Victor's love for Sparky leads him down a dangerous road, blurring the line between life and death, science and the supernatural. Burton gives us a blend of heartfelt moments, absurd humor, and just the right dose of horror, all wrapped in his signature Gothic style. The characters, from Victor to his oddball classmates and even Sparky himself, feel like they have stepped right out of an Edward Gorey illustration, with exaggerated features and quirky personalities that bring the town of New Holland to life in the most unusual way. Tim Burton's unmistakable directorial style is evident in Frankenweenie. From the very first frame, this feels like pure distilled Burton. Darkly whimsical, nostalgic, and beautifully eerie. The black and white photography and the aesthetic is probably the first thing you notice, and it's not just for show. This choice is Burton's way of paying homage to vintage horror films, particularly the classic Frankenstein films from the 30s that captivated him as a child. The monochromatic palette immediately transports us to a world that's haunting and charming, where every shadow feels purposeful and every flash of lightning spikes just the right dramatic note. The cinematography and set design are meticulously crafted to evoke that classic horror vibe while adding the Burton distinct flair. Each frame is filled with rich textured shadows and dramatic contrasts that intensify the mood, especially in scenes where Victor is working in his makeshift lab, reviving Sparky under flashes of lightning. Burton's love for exaggerated designs also shines through in the characters, wide-eyed, angular faces, and slightly twisted forms that make each person and creature memorable, if not even a bit unsettling. And this isn't just stylistic for the sake of style. It's Burton's way of showing us an exaggerated yet heartfelt world that feels both grounded and surreal. And for the story, it wouldn't be a Burton film without a focus on the outsider. Victor is the quintessential Burton hero, a misunderstood, introverted kid with an intense curiosity for the macabre. His love for science makes him an oddball in New Holland, a town that doesn't quite know what to make of his unusual interests. In true Burton fashion, Frankenweenie explores themes of isolation, curiosity, and what it means to be different. Victor's journey to bring Sparky back is both a tribute to the loyalty and love he has for his dog, and a reminder of the risks of diving into the unknown. One of Burton's strongest skills is his ability to blur the line between fantasy and reality. Frankenweenie lives right on that edge, grounded in its deeply emotional story about a boy's love for his pet, yet filled with surreal, grotesque visuals that bring out a sense of wonder and discomfort at the same time. There's a reason why so many of Burton's fans find his work relatable. He has this ability to make the bizarre feel familiar and the familiar feel bizarre. In Frankenweenie, he takes us to a place that feels like it could exist in some alternate reality, where reanimated pets and mad science are par for the course. What's interesting is that, compared to some of Burton's other works, Frankenweenie feels a bit more restrained, but in a thoughtful, intentional way. This film doesn't go as far into the wild, gothic horror realm as, say, Beetlejuice or Sleepy Hollow. Instead, it takes a softer, more intimate approach, almost like Burton's personal love letter to those monster movies and misfit heroes he grew up with. It's as if Burton is inviting us to join him on a nostalgic journey through his childhood obsessions. This refined style gives Frankenweenie that nostalgic, tender quality that sets it apart and makes it a very personal work within Burton's filmography. So let's look at the performances that bring Frankenweenie to life. This film features a refreshingly different voice cast than what we might expect from a Tim Burton project. There's no Johnny Depp or Helena Bonham Carter. Burton's usual stars are absent here, giving room for a cast that feels uniquely suited to Frankenweenie's subdued yet hauntingly nostalgic tone. The role of Victor is voiced by Charlie Tejan, who really brings out the innocence and sincerity of the character. Victor is an unusual kid, but he's not exactly a wild, mad scientist. Tejan's performance captures this beautifully. He gives Victor a soft-spoken, earnest quality that makes you root for him from the very start. You feel his grief over Sparky's death, his joy at bringing him back, and his anxiety as things inevitably spiral out of control. Tejan's voice has just the right level of tenderness and curiosity to make Victor one of Tim Burton's most sympathetic young characters. Another standout performance comes from an actress we haven't seen in a Burton film in a while, Catherine O'Hara, who voices several characters, including Victor's eccentric classmate, the delightfully creepy Weird Girl. O'Hara brings an edge of comedy and creepiness to her role that feels right at home in the world of Frankenweenie. Then you have Martin Short voicing multiple characters, including Victor's father, Mr. Frankenstein, and a classmate, Nasser. Short's versatility adds a touch of humor to the film without undercutting its more heartfelt moments. The whole cast comes together to create a world that feels quirky and deeply human. And then, again, as always it seems, there's Danny Elfman. Honestly, can you imagine this film without Elfman's touch? His score here is subtle and hauntingly beautiful. In Frankenweenie, Elfman's music feels like it's whispering to us from the shadows, setting an eerie and oddly comforting tone. Certain motifs are there for us in the score that have this lullaby quality, like a melody you'd hum to yourself on a rainy day, with a slightly unsettling edge. Elfman knows how to walk that fine line between the sentimental and the spooky, and it makes us feel Victor's longing for his lost friend and his wonder at Sparky's return. His compositions bring a tenderness to scenes that might otherwise feel purely tragic or eerie, depending on your emotional connection to Victor's journey. Elfman and Burton's collaboration has always been a cornerstone of Burton's storytelling. Elfman's score adds that background music, it creates an atmosphere, and it fills in the film's quieter moments with melancholy, curiosity, and it gives those chaotic scenes of reanimated pets a whimsical feel. In Frankenweenie, Elfman's music again isn't just a backdrop. It's a character that echoes the emotional beats and amplifies the nostalgia that Burton clearly poured into this project. It's the kind of score you can listen to on its own and feel like you're right there in New Holland, watching Victor and Sparky under those moody skies. Alright, so how about themes and symbolism? We'll dive deeper because Frankenweenie here is more than just a simple story about a boy and his dog. This is a story of love, loss, and that universal human desire to hold on to what we cherish, even when it defies the natural order. Victor's journey with Sparky is a powerful exploration of how we cope with grief. He's heartbroken by Sparky's death and goes to an extraordinary, even unnatural length to bring his friend back. It's both touching and unsettling, this desperate need to reverse what's generally irreversible. Burton captures that moment that we've all felt, that if we could just do something, anything, to bring back what we've lost, we'd take it, even if it risks upsetting our balance. But Frankenweenie goes further, raising questions about the consequences of defying nature. Victor's actions reflect that intense curiosity and ambition that we sometimes have, the need to push the boundaries of what we can do, especially in the name of science or love. It's a story about the ethical line we often blur when our intentions are good, but our reach extends too far. Burton doesn't condemn Victor for his choice, but he does show us the fallout. Bringing Sparky back unleashes a series of unintended consequences, both for Victor and the lives of his classmates who try to mimic his experiment. This ripple effect emphasizes that our own choices, even those made out of love, can have far-reaching impacts that we may not foresee or be able to control. And of course, we can't overlook Burton's choice to make the tribute to that classic mad scientist trope, mixed with a child's innocent sense of wonder. Victor's fascination with science is what endears us to him, yet it leads him down a dark path. It underscores that thin line between genius and chaos. Burton seems to be inviting us to reflect on the duality of scientific curiosity. It is both a gift and a curse, something that fuels discovery, but also stirs up moral questions. By reviving Sparky, Victor steps into the role of creator, playing with forces he doesn't understand. Burton explores this theme without leaning into that heavy-handedness. He allows us to question the ethics of meddling with life and death in our own way. Then there's the ever-present theme of acceptance. The film suggests that letting go is a necessary part of life, even if it is the hardest lesson to learn. Victor's attempt to cling to Sparky is touching, yet by the end there's a recognition that some things, no matter how dear, are meant to pass. In Frankenweenie, we see a journey that feels like a lesson on acceptance, a reminder that part of loving deeply is sometimes knowing when to let go. Through its mix of humor, horror, and heartfelt moments, Frankenweenie weaves together these themes in a way that feels both nostalgic and universal. This film is a tribute to love, curiosity, and the bittersweet reality of loss, all wrapped up in that signature Tim Burton style. How was Frankenweenie received when it first hit theaters? Well, it wasn't exactly a box office powerhouse. The film performed modestly, bringing in decent numbers, but falling well short of blockbuster territory. Despite Burton's name and his loyal fan base, Frankenweenie didn't have the same mass appeal as, say, an Alice in Wonderland or Batman. But let's be real, Frankenweenie isn't the kind of movie you necessarily go for huge spectacle. Instead, it's a quirky, heartfelt black and white homage to classic horror, which, in a way, set it up for a more niche audience right from the start. Critics, however, had plenty of good things to say. Many appreciated Burton's choice to go back to his roots with this story. Frankenweenie marked a return to the personal, character-driven storytelling that defined his earlier work. Burton wasn't focused on creating a flashy, big-budget spectacle. Instead, he was exploring themes of grief, childhood wonder, and the magic of creation, all wrapped up in a nostalgic gothic package. For longtime fans of Burton, this film felt like a love letter to that classic horror and to his own origins as a filmmaker. Over the years, Frankenweenie has found a loyal, albeit niche, following. While it may not have the immediate cultural impact of an Edward Scissorhands, it's carved out a unique space in Burton's filmography. Some fans view it as a kind of cult classic, that underrated gem that may have been overshadowed upon release but has since grown in reputation. For fans of vintage horror aesthetics and stop-motion animation, Frankenweenie offers something you won't quite find in Burton's other films. Its sincerity, its handcrafted look, and its quirky heart have made it a special film for viewers who appreciate its understated charm. In many ways, Frankenweenie is a tribute to Burton's own career journey. He was a young, aspiring animator when he first made the original short film for Disney. And now, decades later, he returned to tell the story the way he always envisioned. It's like a personal milestone, not just for Burton, but for the fans who have followed him from his earliest works. So while it might not be as iconic as a Beetlejuice or a Corpse Bride, Frankenweenie holds a special place. It's a look back at the roots of Tim Burton's cinematic style and an affectionate nod to the horror genre that has influenced him from the very beginning. Let's look at some behind-the-scenes nuggets about Frankenweenie, because there's a lot of history packed into this film. Let's start with a fun bit of trivia for you. Frankenweenie, as we mentioned, started as a live-action short all the way back in 1984. Tim Burton at the time was working as an animator at Disney, and the studio allowed him to make this passion project. But once the film was completed, Disney shelved it, believing it to be too dark for kids. For Disney at the time, themes of death and reanimation were maybe a little too heavy, especially in a movie aimed at families and children. So they tucked it away. But that early short became a bit of a cult piece in itself, and Burton held on to that story. Fast forward a few decades, and Burton finally got the chance to revisit Frankenweenie, but this time on his own terms. The fact that he chose to remake it in stop motion, a painstakingly detailed and labor-intensive style, tells you how much this project meant to him. It's like he got to step back in time and give one of his earliest creations the full artistic treatment he'd envisioned all those years ago. The result, as we've said, is a film that feels both nostalgic and fresh, like a bridge between his early ambitions and his more mature style. And if you're wondering, those intricate sets and characters, it's no small feat. The stop-motion animation used in Frankenweenie involved creating dozens of detailed miniature sets and over 200 puppets, each one crafted with remarkable precision. The process of animating each character, frame by frame, took a huge team of animators and an incredible amount of patience. For instance, the character of Sparky alone required multiple interchangeable parts to capture his every expression and movement, from excitement to fear to that lovable loyalty that defines him. One of the most interesting bits about the production is how Burton infused it with personal references. Some of the film's locations and background characters are nods to Burton's own childhood memories and inspirations. For instance, the town of New Holland, with its small town vibe and quirky residents, reflects Burton's experiences growing up in Burbank, California. The names and designs of some of Victor's classmates, and even their pets, draw from classic horror archetypes, a tribute to those monster movies that Burton adored as a child. You've got Edgar E. Gore, who is clearly inspired by Igor from Frankenstein, and Toshiaki, who hints at the influence of Japanese kaiju films. And there's one last cool fact. The choice of black and white wasn't just to mimic old horror films. Burton specifically wanted to amplify the emotional tone of the story. By stripping away color, he emphasized the contrast, the light and dark, the innocence of childhood versus the weight of loss. It makes every shadow and every flicker of lighting feel more intense, pulling us into Victor's world in a way that's both eerie and deeply touching. So when you watch Frankenweenie, you're not just seeing a movie. You're seeing Burton's journey from a young animator with a too dark for Disney idea to an acclaimed director finally bringing that vision to life. It's a testament to creative persistence and to sticking with your vision, even if it takes nearly 30 years to see it fully realized. So what's my take on Frankenweenie? Honestly, I think it's one of Tim Burton's most personal films, and there's something really special about it. It's got all the hallmarks of a classic Burton flick, his love of the macabre, his quirky sense of humor, and his unique ability to find beauty in the unusual and the strange. He takes this familiar story of loss and resurrection and wraps it in a heartwarming package that reflects his own nostalgic love for monster movies. The result is a film that's endearing and spooky in that true Tim Burton style. But while Frankenweenie has a lot going for it, I'll be honest, it isn't flawless. At times, it is a bit slow. It doesn't quite have the punch or scope of some of Burton's bigger, more impactful films. Movies like Edward Scissorhands or Beetlejuice carry a certain intensity and unforgettable visual flair that Frankenweenie doesn't quite match. It feels in some ways like a quieter, more introspective piece. And while that gives it a unique charm, it also makes it feel a little smaller and a little less memorable. For me, it lands a solid 6 out of 10. It's a film that holds its own within Burton's filmography, especially if you're a fan of his distinct, darkly whimsical storytelling. You can feel his passion for the material. As I said, it's a love letter to his early influences and even to his younger self as a filmmaker. I think that sentiment comes through beautifully, even if the movie doesn't have the same lasting impression as some of his more iconic works. At the end of the day, if you're a fan of Tim Burton, or if you appreciate a story that's a bit offbeat and heartfelt, Frankenweenie is absolutely worth a watch. It's not going to be the most dazzling or groundbreaking film in his collection, but it is certainly one of the most personal. And for that alone, it's an important and interesting part of his journey as a filmmaker. It captures the essence of his artistic spirit, and it reminds us of what it takes to be unique in the world of cinema. All right, Real Talk family, that's a wrap on Frankenweenie. I hope you enjoyed this dive into Burton's twisted and oddly tender take on the classic Frankenstein tale. But don't go too far, because next time we're switching gears with a Tim Burton film that is a real departure from his usual shadowy gothic world. Big Eyes. This one is still packed with his signature themes of artistic identity and struggle for self-expression, but explores them in a totally different light, both literally and figuratively. It's a fascinating story about creativity, ambition, and the complex relationship between art and personal truth. Trust me, I don't think you're going to want to miss this one. And before we sign off, I'd love to hear what you thought about today's episode. Do you have any favorite moments from Frankenweenie? Did you watch it back in 2012, or are you just now coming to you for the first time now? Let me know over on Threads or Instagram at RealRealTalk. Plus, be sure to follow so you don't miss any updates or behind the scenes moments. And thanks again for joining me on this journey through Burton's world. As always, keep watching, keep loving, and most importantly, keep those reels rolling. Until next time, thank you everybody.